Before we get further into this video, I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, I hate this PC. And I don't really know why I hate it as much as I do, because it's not because it's a badly performing budget system, because don't get me wrong, it performs weirdly badly in a lot of cases, but I guess I can live with that. It's not even because when I bought it, it was dirtier than a drip tray at a 24-hour McDonald's, because you can clean dirt. I guess the reason I hate it so much is because of how inconsistent everything is about it, from its performance to the problems that it has. Because every time you fix a problem, you just get blindsided by another problem.
Hi, how are you?
That seems completely unrelated. It's just terrible. So now that you know where I stand on this terrible PC, let's get into the video. Okay, I actually realized that in that overdramatic intro, I didn't properly set up the premise of this video. Now, I'm on a bit of a journey to build the ultimate used price-to-performance gaming system for under $200 US. Now, in that pursuit, I bought this terrible pile of suck, which is an old iBuy power system that's powered by an AMD Bulldozer FX 8120 CPU, which is kind of an 8-core CPU, and I feel like when it comes to used sub $200 price to performance, this could be a really good CPU to start with. I find out later that I guess it's not, but yeah, we'll leave that till later in the video. Now, when I first bought this PC, I spent so much time just cleaning it that I couldn't get it to run with an RX 570 because I didn't have enough time and there were all kinds of weird issues. So what we're going to do in today's video is we're going to get an RX 570 running in this pile of suck and then see if it turns into the ultimate sub $200 used gaming system. And unfortunately, we're back with the little piggy system, which is very stubbornly holding on to its ideological differences with this RX 570. I'm gonna try and get it working in this video today, but I'm not gonna try too hard, because quite frankly, I don't really care that much. Now, the first suggestion that I got on how to get these two to play nice together was to update the actual BIOS on the motherboard. The thing is though, I went onto Gigabyte's website and they've only ever done one BIOS for this motherboard, which is the one it launched with. So that means one of two things: either it's the most stable BIOS version ever, or Gigabyte just doesn't care at all about this motherboard. But yeah, so I reinstalled it and it hasn't seemed to do anything. Now, the second suggestion was that the power supply is actually an issue, because it may say that it's a 600 watt power supply, but if you look at the actual ratings for the rails and stuff like that, it's more like it's cosplaying as a 600 watt power supply. So I'm gonna change that out and see if it actually does anything. I'm not convinced that it's going to though, because the system does actually boot with the RX 570 in there. The biggest issue is actually installing the drivers, but let's try it out and see what happens. Don't you just love Molex connectors? They're such a sturdy and dependable connector. As you can see, I didn't really spend any time on cable management because honestly I couldn't really be asked. But because its black cables is supposed to catch up in mustard, it just kind of by default looks better. Now, the actual power supply is supposed to look pathetic in comparison with its 500 watts, but on the 12 volt rail, it's got 41 amps available as opposed to 18 amps on the 12 volt rail of the 600 watt power supply. So if the power supply was an issue, this should definitely rectify it. I've run this graphics card with that power supply before, so yes, it should be fine. With that, let's see what happens. Now, after all of this, the way that I got the RX 570 to work in this little grease pan PC was by going into Device Manager, where it actually said that there was an error with the system, and it gave me an error code, which I then Googled. Now, the solution doesn't really make sense to me because it's usually used to get drivers to work with used mining versions of the RX 570. And considering the fact that I bought this graphics card new and I didn't flash any BIOSes onto it over the last 6 months of me using it, it's weird that it's behaving like a mining card. But anyway, basically all I needed to do was use this AMD ATI pixel clock patcher thing, and it patched the graphics card drivers, and well, everything worked. So now that I've gotten the RX 570 to run on this little drip tray of a system, we're expecting much better performance than the GTX 560 that was in there before, which is a very old mid-range graphics card. The thing is though, when I ran the GTA 5 benchmark with the RX 570 in the system, which I just want to remind you, GTA 5 was the game that ran by far the best on the system when it had the GTX 560 in there, I got some really weird results. For some reason, with the RX 570 in here, it performs worse than the system with the GTX 560 in it, which doesn't make any sense to me. The other game's performance were all over the place, but we'll get into that a bit later, because one of the big issues is clearly that there's a massive CPU bottleneck. When you're playing the game, you can see here that the GPU utilization kind of jumps from like 100% and then dips to like 0 for a bit and then goes back up. So there's clearly some CPU bottlenecking going on here. And when I actually looked at what core speed we were getting on the FX 8120, it was sitting at about 3.4 gigahertz, which is not very high considering that the boost frequency of the CPU should be about 4 gigahertz. So then I went into the terrible motherboard's BIOS in the system and tried to manually overclock it and see how far we could get. Now, with an extra 200 megahertz with the CPU running at 3.6 gigahertz, we were getting a pretty big performance jump with the RX 570 in there. Mind you, it's still running worse than it did with the GTX 560, which just blows my mind. That makes no sense, but I reran the benchmark several times and it's just what it's doing, right? It's one of the things why I hate the system so much, is it makes no sense. Now, after that, I decided, okay, let's see how far we can overclock this CPU so that we can get rid of as much of the CPU bottleneck as possible. The problem is, the highest I could get the CPU to go with this terrible motherboard is 3.68 gigahertz. It refuses to boot at higher than that, and at 3.68 gigahertz, it crashes all the time. Now, the obvious reason why this CPU is running so badly, aside from the fact that it is a bull loser CPU, is the fact that the motherboard it comes with is horrendous. It was an entry-level budget motherboard before the bull loser CPUs even came out. It was during the Phenom era. This was a terrible motherboard, so it just can't handle these CPUs that draw near to 200 watts in a lot of cases. It's kind of like running a 3950X 16-core CPU in like a $60 A320 motherboard. It's just a terrible combination, and that's why we can't get more power out of this system. So now that we know all of that, let's have a look at the benchmarks. So as you can see, I guess because of the CPU, we're getting really mixed results. In some more graphically intensive games like Far Cry 5, we're getting a big jump in performance. We could actually get Battlefield 5 running, which is, it runs decently, actually. CSGO only runs a little bit better, but that little bit actually makes a big difference, because CSGO, when it runs at too low a frame rate, it has really bad input lag, whereas with the RX 570, that problem is kind of solved. I could get Fortnite running on it as well, and it's a pretty decent gaming experience. So all in all, 3 games ran decently. CSGO runs okay on it, Battlefield 5 runs okay on it, and then Fortnite runs pretty well on it. So with that, it brings me to the end of what is hopefully the last video I ever have to do with this system. I may keep the CPU and just recycle the rest of the PC, because maybe if we get a better like 990 FX motherboard, we can see how much of a difference that makes. But as it stands, this PC is going to a bin somewhere nearby. But yeah, so if you enjoyed the video, thank you very much for watching me just being angry at a drip tray PC. If you liked the video, like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one, and until the next video, bye bye.